Hello and welcome back, and that is right, we are revisiting the subject of Plex Media Server and we're looking at Synology NAS. Today we are looking at the DS2422 Plus, a 12 bay, a huge desktop NAS from Synology, and in today's video we're going to be running through our usual tests of different multimedia running Plex Media Server on this very NAS. Now, as mentioned in my other videos, this unit has been supplied by CCL Online. I've talked about them in some other videos. They've helped me out in a few videos in the past, and I do think it's worthy to give them a bit of a plug. They've supplied the unit today, and you can pick it up from them here on their own website. There's a bunch of promo deals, different ways to pay, all that kind of guff, and of course, they are linked in the description. Again, I've used them myself. I do personally recommend them. But for now, let's crack on with what you came in today's video to do. You wanted to see how Plex performs on this NAS. Now, why would you be not so much concerned, but why would you be curious about Plex Media Server performance on a NAS like this? Well, nice and simple. It's to do with this CPU right here, the AMD Ryzen V1500B. Now, this processor doesn't have embedded graphics on board. It is a 64-bit x86 processor, so it's got some oomph. It's got 4 cores in architecture there at 2.2 gigahertz per core. And although it doesn't have embedded graphics, it's got some great throughput inside. On top of that, the system arrives with 4 gig of not only DDR4 memory, but DDR4 3200 megahertz ECC memory. It's quite the enterprise little beast. Now, a number of you have seen my other 12 bay review from Synology, and that was utilizing the DS3622XS Plus. If we make our way back into CCL here, you can see the 3622XS, much more powerful NAS, but certainly one with a higher price tag overall. So again, a number of you are looking at the larger scale open to a NAS like this and wondering, thanks to it having that larger scale, and if you do have an enormous collection of 4K or even 8K media, you may be wondering how well this is going to handle this kind of multimedia, even though it has storage largely covered there. Now, in today's Plex video, we will be looking at the usual suspects there. We'll be looking at the Matrix in 720p, we'll be looking at Little Shop of Horrors in 1080p, and then we're going to make our way into those Jellyfish Files, which cover an enormous variety of different kinds of multimedia format and compression technique. Also, at the same time, we've got on the right-hand side of the screen there, the CPU and the memory that's being utilized by not only just Plex, but how it impacts the overall system, and we are accessing this NAS via the local area network there, the LAN. But if we wanted to test it from time to time, we also on the right hand side of the screen here have remote access to this very same server already ready for us to see what it would be like accessing remotely and locally throughout today's test. Now, it's worth highlighting a few things. Again, I know this is a long introduction, but it's very important, if you've not watched my other Plex videos, that you keep a few things under your belt there. First and foremost, during the course of this video, we will be discussing transcoding. Now, let's go ahead and play the matrix here. We're going to play the matrix. I've already scraped the metadata, and indeed on this NAS, we already have transcoding options enabled, although do bear in mind, hardware transcoding isn't going to be an option on a CPU like this. But if we go ahead and play the matrix here, this is a 720p 2 megabits per second file there, and again, it will play absolutely fine there. You can see at the bottom the original quality that we're playing there, 0.7 megabits per second, 720p HD, my bad on the bit rate. And again, we can go ahead and skip back and forth on the file, lovely and easy, boom. No delay whatsoever. Obviously, because we're accessing it on the LAN, that's not going to be an enormous problem. Why don't we go ahead and start playing this file equally here on the right hand side of the screen as well. And if we carry on from the beginning on this screen, we're now accessing this file in 2 different locations on the NAS. Yes, I'm accessing it on the same machine, but one of them is accessing remotely via the internet, and the other one is accessing there on the LAN. And if we open up the config, you can see equally we are still accessing the same media file size. Bear in mind, I am recording on OBS, so there will be the odd delay and slight jump there in some of the recording of what you see, but take my word for it, none of it's occurring for me there while I'm watching. Now, while we come out of that one there, what I'm going to do is come back to that subject of transcoding. Now, the reason that's important is because transcoding is when a file is reshaped, either in its compression technique, in its file output, in its overall picture quality, to be better suited to the destination device. So a full 4K movie might look great in your front room on your 50-inch OLED TV, but you're not really going to need a file that big and that high quality if you're looking at it on an old Samsung Android phone on the commute home from work. Needless to say, in order to lower data consumption and to make the file better suited to the destination device and not be so clunky, transcoding can reshape a file to be better suited to the intended device. Unfortunately, we don't have all the devices in the world right now. So what we can do is we can force the system to transcode. We can make the system create smaller versions of these files for us to watch on the fly. So the first one we're going to go for is a 480p transcode there. This is going to reshape, re-output the file to a 480p version. As you can see there, we can flick along and Plex is running fine there. Again, we've still got no delays flicking all the way through. So why don't we now go ahead and transcode a little deeper. And this is where having a non-embedded graphics CPU really starts to show itself. So we're going to go for 240p. We're going to zoom out. And again, there's going to be a bit of a delay. And here on the right-hand side of the screen is when you're going to start to see the CPU and the memory have to work that little bit harder, as you can see there, because we're doing something now where embedded graphics would have easily taken the load. But not having graphics on board on a system like this, it means you're going to hit these bumps along the way. And it's in these bumps and these transcodes where we measure the performance of many NASs for Plex Media Server, particularly for those of you that have incredibly dense, high-end audio and visual media, that although you've got some devices you want to enjoy in its original quality, some devices you can get away with something much, much lower. So let's come out of the matrix there, and now we're going to make our way into a 1080p file. This is a little shop of horrors. Again, this is the full original version with the alternate ending, and I say that because still to this day when I'm making these videos, I get messages by people that didn't know this version exists. And it's a great film, and although it's nothing to do with this channel, please, please, please watch this film. Anyway, let's go ahead and play that film there. This is a 1080p original version. Again, you can see 1.9 megabits per second. Bear in mind, some of the file types that we're going to be dealing with later are going to be huge. This, for example, is a 1 hour, 43-minute movie. Bear that in mind later on when we watch some of the other files. So, as we can see, we can skip back and forth. The movie's running fine. Again, if we choose to, we can make our way into the remote access version of this, so we can go ahead and play the file there, play from the beginning. And again, if there is small dips in what you're seeing in the frame rate, don't worry, that is just because of how many things we're doing at once here to do this recording. I don't see those, and indeed if we go into the task manager there, just to give you some idea of how hard the system's being forced to work, we can open the task manager on my local machine here, go into the performance benchmark, and we can see that things are working pretty darn hard there on the GPU and the CPU. I've taken my laptop's graphics card out of the equation because it's being used for other stuff, and sometimes a system will offload the work onto the laptop. So I'm making sure that my GPU is not being included in these equations. But for now, we can see that it's running. Again, we can come out of Little Shop of Horrors there, drop that there, and again, if we skip back and forth, we've got all that running fine. So for now, let's change the transcoding quality. We can do an automatic conversion where it analyzes the device you're accessing and the general behavior of what you're doing, and then it changes it on the fly. But again, we don't really want to do anything kind of that blunt. We want to go ahead and be a little bit more precise. So let's bring it down to 720p at 2 megs. And again, absolutely fine there. Running like a dream. Let's try something else, a little bit denser. Now we're going to go to the lowest of the low, 160p. So from here, 160p again. This is where we're going to see that system have to work a lot harder. It's playing, there's about 9 pixels on screen. We're seeing there on the right hand side of the screen that the CPU is having to really put its back into it, but it's managing to do the job. If we skip forward, we can see that there is a slight delay as the system is having to kind of reshape the file on the fly for us, and the CPU is working hard, but it is still doing the job for us. And again, this is a pretty hard transcode for a CPU without embedded graphics, and I'm quite pleased that it's managing to do that on this relatively dense HD file. So now we're going to make our way onto the densest of the files. These are the Jellyfish files. Now, I've talked about them in other videos, but I can't take for granted that you guys have seen other videos in this series. This may be your first time following Plex testing on this channel. So I'm going to make it nice and easy for you. On the screen here, we have a bunch of files. These files here are the same 30-second file. It's of some jellyfish and some fish knocking around in the ocean. However, with each jump in quality, the files get bigger, the files get denser, the quality gets higher, and overall it gets harder and harder for a system to play these files. Now, the bottom 5 files cannot be played by most NASs. More than half the NASs I've ever tested were unable to play these 5 files. These are enormous. This file at the bottom especially is huge. It is unconventional in its scale there. Let's zoom in a tiny bit to get that a bit clearer. Just to give you a bit of perspective, if we make our way into the file manager and we go into the Jellyfish files and list them by size, what you see here on screen is again that same 30-second file starting at 10 megabytes and ending at 1.4 gigabytes. That's for 30 seconds. That would be 2.8 gigabytes per minute if this was a movie. Imagine a 90 or a minute, or even like Avengers Endgame 2.5 Godfather 3 hours length movie, if every 30 seconds was 1.4 gigabytes. So you can see why not only are these bottom 4 files at 30 seconds unconventional in their scale and size, very little media you're going to play right now is this size. So although I have absolutely no confidence this system's going to be able to play these files, I just wanted to explain why that probably will be if and when it happens. The other thing that's worth touching on, and again, I'm sorry to be repetitious if you've heard this in other videos, but it's to talk about these codecs H.264 and Hevc. Now, H.264 is a compression technique. It is the means with which a movie in the cinema can be compressed in size to be visible on your TV at home or your mobile. Now, this compression technique is widely used. It has patents, a single patent, but it doesn't really cost anything to use, and it plays on everything. Later on, though, I believe around 2014 to 15, when it commercially took off really, is Hevc, otherwise known as Highly Efficient Video Codec, or H.265. This is a much more efficient compression tool, and it was used as multimedia was getting denser and bigger in quality. However, the patents for Hevc is shared across multiple sources, and it can be either expensive or nigh on impossible for a lot of hardware, not just NAS, but a lot of client devices in your home to support Hevc natively, that is to say, to play it in its original form, because of the lack of license. Consequently, the system, when it comes to playing Hevc files, needs to convert immediately. You know that transcoding we've just been doing? It will need to do that automatically, will not be able to play the original quality. So Hevc files, or H.265 files, always require more work to play, and this is the same for your mobile devices, for your TV, even home consoles if they don't have the license. For clearance, the 10-bit moniker largely denotes HDR, H or 10-bit. Hevc is largely reserved for HDR quality multimedia. So that is kind of what we're playing here as these files get denser in the bit rate, starting at 3 megabit all the way up to 400 megabits in their bit rate, and in HD and 4K towards the end. So now you know what we're going to play. Why don't we do some of these tests and have a little look, shall we? So let's start boring. Let's go for a 3 megabits per second HD file. And again, unsurprisingly, it played this file. This file is about the same scale as the Little Shop of Horrors file that we played, and as you can see, 3 megabit 1080p HD, it's playing. And again, I'm sorry about the drop in frame rate every time I'm zooming in and out. Don't worry, that's my onboard encoding, not the NAS. But as you can see, it's played this file. So what we're going to do is play all of the H.264 files, because these are the ones that we're concerned we are going to hit barriers on. So let's go with the 10 megabits per second H.264 file. Again, right hand side of the screen. Ignore the top one, that's bandwidth, that's the network space that's being used. We want to concentrate on CPU and RAM. And as you can see, the file is playing, everything's fine, the CPU is barely murmuring. Let's ramp it up. Now we're going to hit 30 megabits per second. Let's go for that one there. 30 megabits per second. Open that up. And again, another thing to pay attention to is this dark orange line here at the bottom. That dark orange line represents how much of the multimedia file the system has managed to line up and have ready for on-the-fly playback. As the system starts to struggle, what you'll notice is the light orange, which is playback, start to outpace the encoding or the buffering there on the dark orange. When the light orange, which is playback, completely outpaces that of buffering and encoding there, in other words the dark orange, the file will cease to play, because the file is now playing organically faster than the system can encode. But it did the 30 frames absolutely fine. Now we're going to hit the 100 frames per second 1080p file. Again, the right hand side of the screen, the CPU hasn't really gone nuts yet, but we can see that the dark orange is taking longer to fill up there. As we let it fill to the top, the CPU has started to present a little bit of a bump there in the road, and the file there is it's struggling. It's only just outpacing the playback there, and this could really be the limits of 1080p playback on this on H.264, but it still managed to play back the file in this 30-second test. So now we're going to hit 4K. This is a 120 megabits per second 4K version. This is a substantial jump. Just to put that into perspective, the file that we just played at 100 megabits was 350 megabytes, or around about a third of a gig. The next file we're going to play is almost 80 or so gigabytes more, megabytes more. So for the same file, we're starting to see those bigger jumps in between each margin. Again, as this CPU does not have embedded graphics, 4K playback is going to be tremendously difficult. 4K doesn't just come natively. It's not the same as playing usual OpenGL 3D or normal multimedia. 4K requires a lot of work. And as you can see, although we saw a bump in the road, playback down the bottom here has ceased. Now what that means is the system has realized it can't be done. Something is hanging, and generally this means that we're going to get kicked out of the Plex media server playback like so, because the system couldn't play the file. What about now if we play it and this time invite the system to automatically transcode to the best possible version of the file it can play? Again, this doesn't mean we're saying this is a success because it wasn't able to play back the file. But still, you can see that now the CPU is working a lot harder here on the right to try and attempt playing this file here. On the left-hand side of the screen, we can see that the file is now being lined up for playback. But given that this file is only 30 seconds long and it's taken more than 10 to 12 seconds to get as far as we have now, even if and when this file plays, it's going to really struggle to outpace the organic playback being made by the file itself being played via Plex Media Server. And right now, even if it plays, I would struggle to call this a success. As you can see, it still kicked us out, and the CPU and the memory is starting to wind down. So that's really the limit of how far we could go on H.264. We could very quickly try the 200 megabits per second version in H.264 4K, but if it couldn't play the previous iteration, I cannot see a realistic scenario that it will play this. And again, generally you find that these files will struggle at the 5 to 7 second mark if they are not going to be able to play back the file. And as you can see, it's looking very much like that is the case. The CPU has ceased trying to effectively attack this file, and sadly I wouldn't call that a success. So for now, let's transition back to the Hevc, those H.265 more complex files. Now remember how easy the system was able to play back the H.264 there at the top? Watch what happens when we try to play the Hevc. So again, 3 megabit, this is a 10 megabyte file here being played. We open it up, as you can see it's automatically transcoded. You can't even play the original quality. And look over here on the right, even though it's 10 megabytes in size, the system has had to use an enormous amount of resources to play back this file. Just 10 megabytes, this file. It's played it, and the transcoding is happening with the conversion in the background, but still nonetheless, as you can see right now, the DS2422 Plus and that CPU, much like the 6 and 8 bay we tested, is maybe not suitable for this kind of multimedia right now. So now we're going to make our way into a 10 megabits per second version of that file. Again, you're going to see the CPU spike here at the top right of the screen. But what we want to look at is down here. We want to look at how well this dark bar here can stay ahead of playback. Because as you can see, and I'm going to try to move the mouse a little bit less, the dark line is only just staying ahead of playback. Now it looks, at least at a casual glance, that this would remain ahead of playback. You know, if you were watching a 90-minute movie, I think this would still continue to stay ahead of playback. But still, this is a lot of system resources being used here in order to play back this file. And 10 megabits per second Hevc is kind of what you're getting in the bulk of domestic media these days. So it can definitely play this file, but it required a lot of the, the stuff under the bonnet to get this done. So now we're going to try the 30 megabit. We're likely to see the same problems that we've just seen. So again, we'll leave it. It's going to automatically convert. We can see that dark orange line starting to fill up there on the bottom of the screen. On the right hand side of the screen, we can see the CPU going absolutely cocoa bananas. And there at the bottom, we can see that the line, the dark orange, is now really struggling to stay ahead. And I'm not 100% certain that it could remain ahead. I think for this 30-second file, it would remain ahead. But if we were watching a 30-minute episode of a TV drama or an hour and a half or 2-hour movie, I'm not convinced that this system could maintain staying ahead of the playback there with the buffering. So now we're going to go for the 100 meg file. 100 megs, we're really hitting the wall here. Oh, no, we've gone for the wrong file. I do apologise. It's come out of there. We want the 100 megabit Hevc. We'll go into it there. We'll open it up. Again, we want to look at the dark orange there and how well it can stay ahead. We know the CPU is going to have to work extraordinarily hard. But for now, it's taken, 8-9 seconds to get to where we're up to so far. And it's really going to struggle to stay ahead of that playback there. We're going to let this play out, but for now, with the CPU really getting rinsed there at the top right of the screen and playback closing in on the buffering, I wouldn't comfortably call this a success right now. 100 megabit HD isn't as common, really, so I wouldn't be overly concerned, but still, if you take your multimedia seriously and you have a particularly diverse multimedia collection, you might be concerned at this point. Now, with 4K media, I have almost no confidence this system is going to be able to get the job done. Indeed, we've got 120 4K and the 200 and the 400. So let's go with the 120. Bear in mind, this is also 10-bit as well, an added pressure for the system. So we're leaving that there. Open it up. It's automatically converting. And as you can see, now that buffering there at the bottom of the screen is so slow paced, there is absolutely no way it's going to be able to outpace playback. If this file does manage to play at all, you would be lucky to get 10 seconds out of this file. It's taken close to 12 or 15 seconds just to get to this point to allow the file to be played, and that's over a local area network. This doesn't even introduce remote access or kind of in-depth transcoding, and as you can see, playback is going to hit buffering about now and this file's going to freeze as the file stutters and gets a little bit ahead on the buffering, and this would continue for the remainder of enjoying that file. And I think that's really the limits of this. We're just going to try the final 2 files for the sheer sport of it, but realistically it's not going to be any kind of success here. If we have a look, open it up there, go for the conversion, and once again we're seeing very slow work being done here. We're seeing the CPU getting absolutely rinsed, and again I think we can largely summarize everything today in that the DS2422 Plus, great file management NAS, great business NAS with some great software from Synology, but when it comes to multimedia, I wouldn't comfortably recommend this system for Plex Media Server and your multimedia use. I would recommend it for domestic stuff. I'd recommend it for sharing typical files, but for high density 4K Plex Media Server enjoyment, I'm not sure the DS2422 Plus is going to tick those boxes for you. And again, give that last file a test. Again, as mentioned in at the beginning of the video, this system was supplied to us by CCL Online. Again, we've worked with them before in other videos. They've supplied us some hardware to make some great content for you. So again, do check them out. I do recommend them. But otherwise, this has been my Plex Media Server test of this, the DS2422 Plus. A great NAS, a beefy NAS, a huge scale storage NAS. Maybe not the best for multimedia, but great for a lot of other things. So do check out the reviews and guides and lots of 5x5 and comparisons about this device linked in the description. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. It genuinely helps me understand what I'm doing right and wrong. Click subscribe to learn more about as we talk about Plex and different NASs and their suitability, as well as the back catalogue of many NASs now that we've tested, and use the free advice section over on NAS Compares linked in the description. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.